Bill Martinez here. We've got Tom Fitton with us, the president of Judicial Watch, his brand new book from the best-selling author on top of everything else that he's famous for, Rights and Freedoms in Peril, an investigative report on the left's attack on America. Tom, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Hey, good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Tom, this is an investigative report, really, and I go back to when, I don't know, what was it, 2010, 2012, I think 2010, your first book. I mean, you have been shouting from the timbers warnings about how our democracy has been slipping. And through each book that you have presented up to this one, it's been a continuation saga, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a battle against the forces that, through corruption, undermine the rule of law in our constitutional republic.
Hmm.
And, like every struggle, you have wins and losses. And I think
Right.
we've had many wins. But, half the battle, in my view, especially in policy debates, is defining what the problem is.
Hmm.
And it isn't saying, oh, woe is me. It's saying this is the problem. And when you
Right.
know what the problem is, you, I think, have a better understanding of how to deal with it versus, thinking that there's another issue out there that's the real problem that, the politicians frankly rely on to distract us from the underlying corruption that is endemic here in Washington, D.C. But, this latest book, Bill, I've talked about previously the corruption of in the Clinton years, and then,
Hmm.
frankly, during George W. Bush's years, there was this
Right.
kind of sleepwalking through the disaster of the Clinton years, and then it led to the crisis of the Obama years, and then Trump came in, and there was this, this cancer metastasized, really,
Right.
and there was this communist approach to dealing with one's political opponents, to censoring political opponents, to dismantling the kind of structures that protect our rights and freedoms. And it's different than, Boss Tweed type of corruption, isn't it? This is
Hmm. Yeah.
kind of a more of an ideological attack on these institutions. And, those are the students of the left understand that, communism is inherently corrupt. So, that this is why politicians on the take tend to be comfortable with it because, they'll go with whoever's buttering their bread.
Exactly. Well, there's no accountability, and you cited, I said 2012 with the Corruption Chronicles that you had written, and began to lay this all out, for us to see. And and I think one of the key contributors to all that is that truth became relative. Truth has been buried in the process, and that's the problem that we have right now. Donald Trump, when he came into the Beltway, pulled back the curtain, and we started to see things in that administration from the very beginning, even through COVID. All of a sudden, we got all this revelation of what's been happening, to our kids and our country, our culture, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of what Judicial Watch is about, like figuring out what the truth is. I can go on and, Bill, we can all talk about policy and politics and kind of bemoan the state of the culture. What we try to do is provide information about what's really going on in the government. So you have an understanding of who's doing what and why and when. And that's why Judicial Watch has focused on the Freedom of Information Act to
I was going to
uncover
say, right.
government documents. And when there's wrongdoing specific enough, we go in and try to stop it through state and federal court action.
Mhm. Well, speaking of FOIA requests, do you guys keep a rolling number of how many FOIA requests you put out, or you just there's just so many thousands of them, you stop counting?
Yeah, it's like how many stars are in the sky, right?
Exactly. Right.
But there are thousands of FOIA requests, and we have hundreds. I'm sure we've sued nearly 1,000 times, but we usually have 100 cases going at any one time, more or less.
Mhm.
So we can only sue on a fraction of what we're asking about. And when you have a $4 trillion government, Judicial Watch is just a mote in the eye of Leviathan in that regard, right?
Yeah.
Or speck in the eye, really. And but on the other hand, our law, the rule of law, still is powerful.
Yeah.
So what is glorious about the American system, I don't think is readily available anywhere else in the world, is that Judicial Watch can go to court, and the FBI, the IRS, the Justice Department, you name it, they have to answer to our request. Now, we may not get everything we want. They may
Right.
stonewall us. It's not perfect. But at least we're on equal footing. And knock on wood, we haven't been thrown in prison for asking the wrong questions as they do in other countries.
Yeah, exactly. But look what happened to the lawfare of Donald Trump. I mean, you say knock on wood, but you say knock on wood with some sense of trepidation that, it could happen.
Yeah, I mean, so speaking of knock on wood, I got a knock on the door from the FBI issuing a subpoena because, in my view, we were calling out the abuse of Donald Trump with this sham documents case.
Yes.
And they hauled me in, Jack Smith's team did, questioned me for 4 hours on First Amendment related activity by Judicial Watch.
Huh.
It was like a political argument. I felt like I was on an MSNBC panel for 4 hours, and in retrospect, it was absurd. But think of the abuse of power involved in making that happen. It's like saying to the head of the ACLU, you're suing the government too much. You're too activist. We're going to call you in and ask you what you've been talking about and what you've been
Exactly.
doing.
Mhm.
Outrageous.
Right. Well, in your book, Rights and Freedoms in Peril, I mean, you hit the key topics. I mean, this is a great snapshot on where we are right now, starting off with the planned chaos at the border. You say this was planned.
Yeah, the left has been pushing for open borders for a generation now, and the question is how far have they been able to get to their goal of erasing citizenship,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Erasing borders. They've sought to achieve it through sanctuary cities, which treated non-alien or non-residents or non-citizens just like regular citizens, even though they were here illegally. Even if
Right.
they committed crimes, they got special protection.
Exactly.
And now they've doubled down in the last under the Biden administration. Well, we'll just open up the borders, practically speaking. And once they're here, we'll give them money. Or better yet, we'll actually help bring these aliens here, even though they're not technically allowed to be here
Right.
under the law. We'll traffic children. We don't care. Children in cages. Oh, that's JV stuff. We're going to
Right.
traffic them.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what's next? Selling their body parts? Are we going to be like China?
Yeah, well, they do that with aborted babies, but that's a different
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Only David Daleiden paid the price for that one, right?
Yeah,
Planned
yeah.
Parenthood got away with murder and then some.
Yeah, we've exposed how that has gone on using federal tax dollar. People don't know this, and they probably don't want to know this, and I don't blame them. Using tax dollars to take the organs and brains and skulls of babies who killed through abortion and sell them for medical experimentation.
You see, this is the thing that makes it such a joke, my body, my right. What right in our Constitution allows you to murder a person, much less sell their baby parts?
Yeah, I mean that's the big debate on the pro-life side, and one of the issues I kind of raised in the book, and it's being raised again because we just sued about it, is the idea that if you hold the views we hold, and I think people disagree on this issue, it doesn't mean they're the worst people in the world if they disagree, but I don't want to put them in jail.
Right.
They
Exactly.
want to put us in jail for
Right.
disagreeing.
Right. We're talking from the best-selling author, Tom Fenton, his brand new book, Rights and Freedom in Peril. Tom, continue on with what we were talking about in terms of, what the left has done to conservatives in terms of trying to have an honest conversation about, about abortion, about life.
Well, we just sued the Army, the Defense Department for documents in the Army where they were suggesting if you were a member of a Right to Life group, you were a terrorist. They were terrorist groups.
Right.
And as the book highlights, we talk about this really significant, I would say this most significant threat to our First Amendment freedoms in American history,
Mm.
with the censorship, with government pressure, which inherently relies on the use of force and threats of jail and other things to censor folks. Obviously, trying to put Trump in jail for exercising not only his duties under the Constitution, but his First Amendment right to
Right.
talk about a dispute in an election. We've never had this before. Judicial Watch has been censored repeatedly for putting out information we uncovered through litigation.
Right.
I mean, just the other day, or just a few weeks ago, Facebook, um, we put out information from the DC government that 113 non-citizens voted in the presidential primary. Now, they're only
Right.
supposed to vote in local elections, but they gave us a document saying they voted in the presidential primary. We put that out there,
Hmm.
and Facebook censored it.
Yeah. Well, and look what's happening to Virginia right now, right? They're trying to clean up their voter rolls, and the judge goes, I mean, or the Democratic Party and their apparatchik goes, no, we don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, we've sued to clean up voting rolls. We kind of know what we're talking about. My colleagues are former DOJ attorneys who are expert in the area. But the idea that the federal law that requires you to clean up the voting rolls requires you to allow non-citizens to reside or illegally stay on voter registration lists, it's
Yeah.
absurd. Shows you what their agenda is, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, they talk about free and fair elections. That's just a title. It's not by practice at all. I mean, and the thing that I find quite curious all the time is they're always asking conservatives, Tom, you don't believe in the results of 2020? Why are you asking it? You say it's a foregone conclusion, but you keep bringing it up. The fact of the matter is, according to Rasmussen, a majority of Americans still believe there were shenanigans that happened, but the government's not interested in doing any kind of investigation into what happened in 2020.
Well, this kind of goes to the heart of, the rights and freedoms in peril. Your right to have your vote counted appropriately and have your election be run in a manner in which you can have confidence.
Yeah.
But they want to throw that out. I think they oppose, I've kind of gone from, well, they want to be able to steal elections to they don't want elections. They
No.
really don't.
Yeah, they don't.
I mean,
Yeah.
you see that with Kamala Harris,
Yeah,
right?
because they
They had
because
a
they know
primary,
better.
boom,
They know
all
better.
those
Oh,
votes
yeah.
disappear, and she's the nominee.
All the elites know better than us, Tom. That's why.
Yeah.
We just need to shut up, go along. Everything will be hunky dory. And if you get lost along the way, thank God for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to put you on the right path.
Yeah. And from my perspective, there's going to be a long fight, and it's going to be continuing battles, no matter who wins the election.
Yes.
I've been highlighting that. Is the left going to stop trying to pack the Supreme Court, stop trying to censor us, stop trying to ensure open borders, and that non-citizens get to remain here no matter how they got here?
Right.
Of course, they're going to keep on fighting for that.
Of
And it
course.
doesn't matter who wins. Those
Mhm.
issues are always going to be front and center. They're always going to be against transparency. They're always going to be against election integrity. They're always going to be against the rule of law. They're always going to be against our Constitution. And it used to be that we could have arguments and discussions with liberals, but this is not a liberal approach.
Right. Exactly.
There's this communist approach. Doesn't mean everyone doing it is a communist, but they certainly have embraced this totalitarian approach to
Mhm.
dealing with political issues here in the United States.
Well, everyday Americans must understand what it means. I mean, you talk rights and freedoms in peril. I mean, these are precious, absolutely precious elements of our Constitution, and we must treat it as such. If we don't, hey, we're going to have more of Joe Biden's America.
Look, Trump was almost killed twice as a result, I would suggest, of incompetence,
Mhm.
politics, you name it, at the Secret Service and in the Biden-Harris administration. And
Right.
then after he's nearly killed a second time, the left says, well, he kind of deserved it because of his rhetoric.
Right. He's not the one that's saying I'm a threat to democracy.
So I would argue our rights, our freedoms, and our lives are at issue here.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. We got about 4 minutes left, and I did want to address, and I'm so glad you brought this up in your book, the lies about January 6th, especially Ashli Babbitt.
Yeah, we filed a lawsuit for Ashli Babbitt's, Judicial Watch attorneys did, a lawsuit for her estate, a wrongful death lawsuit, $30 million against the feds. And she was shot improperly. I mean, it was a bad shooting. It's a wrongful death. And, I ask your listeners and viewers to compare and contrast the treatment of Lieutenant Byrd, the shooter,
Mm-hmm.
with the treatment of every other officer involved in a controversial shooting.
Yeah.
No grand jury, no serious investigation, no put him on leave, make him fight for his job. And I'm not saying that's always appropriate in every shooting case. But in this case, where the video showed, he shot an unarmed woman
Into a crowd.
into a crowd. I mean,
Yeah,
it met every criteria for a bad shoot.
exactly.
And this Congress, this administration covered it up. And the only official homicide victim that day was Ashli Babbitt. And they're still hiding videos we've been fighting for as we hide with this disclose. We just uncovered, for instance, the CIA was present on January 6th, providing law enforcement support. I mean, I guess I'm old fashioned, but I thought the CIA wasn't allowed to do that.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. And there were something like 40 FBI operatives as well on the
I don't know
ground.
what they don't want to tell us what the numbers are, right? So it's all kind of speculation and guesswork. The fact that they don't want to tell us what the numbers were 4 years after the fact suggests that the numbers are something they are embarrassed about.
Yeah. Well, the thing you brought up in your book, and it was interesting because I had not read this before, Tom, and that is that Ashli Babbitt, when she entered the Capitol building, she first went on the Senate side, and an officer directed her to the House side, where she was subsequently murdered. I had no idea. I thought she was always in that part of the building, that she hadn't been directed by Capitol Police or by a guard to go somewhere else, because this is the misdirection of the whole narrative, is that you see some of the video where these officers are telling people, oh, come on in. And then you see, you cut away to another section and you got conflict going on. It's just, how do you make sense out of it? Oh, well, let's get a January 6th committee that's so biased that has their own narrative, and they come up with a whole different story altogether.
January 6th is a cudgel that the left is using to suppress their opposition, literally try to jail Trump, frighten Americans from disputing another election that may or may not be compromised, suppress the First Amendment rights of countless Americans. The tragedy and the outrage of January 6th is not necessarily what happened that day. Ashli was killed. People were injured. Violence is, it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But the abuse of citizens by our government using January 6th as a pretext, there's been nothing like it, at least in the modern era.
Yeah, and you also have the death of Roseanne Boylan, which it's still, I mean, you see footage of a female officer hitting her with a stick as she's laid out. There is argument that that could have been instrumental in her death. I guess that could be as valid as the suggestion of the one Capitol Police officer who was hit with a canister and 2 days later had a heart attack, and they tried to associate that.
Stroke. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the Boylan death is disturbing because to me the police just were either out of control or poorly trained or poorly managed. But the fact remains, the only homicide that day was of Ashli in terms of the official record.
Right.
And they want to put Trump in jail on January 6th and disputing the election, but they don't want to answer our questions about January 6th and the election disputes. And I just think it's interesting. They want to talk about 2020, January 6th all the time, but Republicans are told, conservatives are told, you can't talk about it.
Right. Exactly.
It's a very interesting dynamic, and of course, we're fearless in that regard. We'll say what we think, and and it may not be something that people always agree with on our side, because sometimes we say, I know there's this theory you have. Actually, the truth is worse, and let us explain it to you. And sometimes people don't like that, but we try to stick to the facts here. And you're going to read this book, and you're going to say, well, at least Fitton's pointing to documents here.
Exactly.
He's
Yeah.
not just bloviating.
Yeah. As they say, you bring the receipts, Tom.
Yeah.
We appreciate that. Judicial Watch's president, Tom Fitton, has been our guest. His new book, Rights and Freedoms in Peril, an investigative report on the left's attack on America, direct from the New York Times, best-selling author himself. Tom, thank you so much for being with us. Take care.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Bill.